Here, on our planet, time is not a gentle, flowing river. It is a series of cataclysmic events, of seismic shifts that define the very landscape of our existence. Before the towering steel and glass jungles of our modern cities pierced the clouds, before the first steam engine hissed into life, before even the great pyramids pointed towards the heavens, the destiny of our species was being forged. It was shaped not by grand, sweeping movements, but by singular, explosive moments, each a critical turning point in the epic story of humanity. These were the inflection points, the moments of profound change that would echo through millennia. These were the ancient crucibles where our future was smelted and hammered into shape. Wars that did not just topple kings but shattered entire civilizations, leaving behind whispers that would inspire new empires. Inventions so profound they did not merely improve life but fundamentally altered our perception of reality itself, bending the very fabric of time and space to our will. Ideas born in the minds of prophets and philosophers that were so powerful they would cross oceans and deserts, embedding themselves into the DNA of our cultures, our laws and our deepest beliefs. The past is often seen as a distant country, a collection of faded photographs and dusty relics, silent and inert. But that is a profound misunderstanding of its nature. The past is not dead, it is a living, breathing force. It is the invisible architecture that supports our world, the unseen current that guides the river of our lives. It is very much alive, its pulse beating in the heart of our institutions, its breath felt in the words we speak every day. It is a story of survival, of innovation, of conflict and of creation. We invite you on a journey back to witness 10 of these pivotal moments, 10 ancient events that irrevocably rewired the future of our world. Some you may know, but their true impact is far greater than you can imagine. And as we venture through these annals of time, you will discover how a single act, a single idea, a single battle could set in motion a chain of events so powerful they continue to shape our world today. Stick around because number 4 on our list, it quite literally split the world in half. Our story begins on the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia, in a land nestled between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Here, around 3200 BCE, in the burgeoning city-states of Sumer, a quiet revolution was taking place. It did not begin with the clash of armies or the crowning of a king, but with a simple, humble act. An ancient hand, guided by a need greater than subsistence, picked up a sharpened reed and pressed it into a tablet of wet, pliable clay. This was not art for art's sake, this was something entirely new, a technology of the mind. At first the marks were simple pictures, pictograms representing the tangible world. A head of barley for a measure of grain, a depiction of an ox for a tally of livestock, a wavy line for water. This was a system born of necessity, a ledger for the world's first accountants and bureaucrats, keeping track of tributes, rations and trade. It was a tool to manage the growing complexity of urban life, a way to record the tangible wealth of a temple or a palace. But the potential held within these crude symbols was far greater than a mere inventory of sheep and silver. Over time, these pictures evolved, becoming more abstract, more symbolic. The wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform no longer just represented objects. They began to represent sounds, the very phonemes of spoken language. This was the critical leap. The ability to transcribe the ephemeral, to capture fleeting spoken words and give them permanence. A thought, once confined to the mind of an individual and the reach of their voice, could now be frozen in time, held fast in baked clay, waiting to be rediscovered, reread and respoken. This was the birth of history itself. We journey forward in time, some 15 centuries later, but remain in the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. The city-states of Sumer have given way to the mighty Babylonian Empire, and here in magnificent Babylon, a king named Hammurabi reigns. Around 1754 BCE, this ruler would erect a monument that was not a tribute to military victory or a testament to a god, but something far more revolutionary. He commanded his scribes to carve comprehensive laws onto a towering black diorite stele over 7 feet tall and place it in a public square for all his subjects to see. This was a radical act of transparency and a profound statement about the nature of power. For millennia, justice had been a private affair, dispensed by tribal elders or kings according to tradition or personal decree. It was often arbitrary, inconsistent and hidden from common view. Hammurabi shattered this paradigm. By inscribing his laws in stone, he declared that justice was not a secret belonging to the powerful, but a public contract between state and people. It was a system of rules, visible to all, that would apply throughout his empire. The code itself was a marvel of legal thought, covering a vast array of civic life. It detailed regulations for commerce and trade, setting prices and wages. It outlined family law governing marriage, divorce and inheritance with intricate precision. It specified punishments for crimes ranging from petty theft to murder. The principle of lex talionis, the law of retaliation, is famously enshrined within its text. The phrase "an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth" became more than a proverb. It became official state policy, a clear and brutal calculus of retribution. Yet it was more than harsh punishments. The code introduced concepts that are cornerstones of modern jurisprudence. It established the principle of presumed innocence, placing burden of proof upon the accuser. It differentiated punishments based on social status of perpetrator and victim, a hierarchical view certainly, but one acknowledging nuance. Above all, it cemented the idea of the state, not the individual, as ultimate arbiter of justice and enforcer of law. The influence of Hammurabi's code was both immediate and enduring. Throughout his vast empire, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, it provided common legal framework that unified diverse populations of Babylonians, Amorites, and Assyrians. A merchant from Ur could travel to Sippar, confident that rules of contract and liability would be the same. This legal certainty was a powerful catalyst for economic activity, fostering trust and encouraging trade on unprecedented scale across the ancient Near East. But its legacy extends far beyond Babylon's borders. The very act of codifying law became a model for civilizations to come. The legal traditions of the Hebrews, with detailed commandments in the Book of Exodus, show clear parallels in form and content. The lawgivers of ancient Greece and later the brilliant legal minds of Rome, who developed sophisticated principles of their own civil law, were continuing a tradition that Hammurabi had so powerfully established. The belief that a just society must be a society of laws, not men. The code's central tenets, the importance of written evidence, the state's role as mediator, and establishment of clear rules and consequences, have echoed down through the centuries. They form the bedrock of countless legal systems that govern our lives today. Every time a contract is signed, every time a dispute is settled in court, every time a government passes a new regulation, we witness the distant reverberations of Hammurabi's decree. The idea that we should live under clear, predictable rules is an inheritance from his ancient kingdom. Thus, this black stone pillar, now resting in the Louvre Museum, is more than a remarkable artifact. It is a foundational document in the story of human civilization. It represents the moment when we collectively decided to subordinate our primal instincts for revenge to a higher, impartial authority. It was a monumental step away from chaos and towards order, a recognition that for society to flourish, it requires not just strength and power, but a framework of justice, carved in stone for all to see and for all to obey. Here, in the vast, unforgiving deserts of the Sinai, a narrative of immense power took root, one that would echo through millennia. It is a story of a people in chains, their identity forged in the crucible of servitude under the shadow of the Great Pyramids. For generations they labored, their spirits as burdened as their bodies, their prayers whispered into indifferent winds. This was a world steeped in polytheism, where a pantheon of gods governed every aspect of life, from the flooding of the Nile to the fate of the pharaohs. Yet, from this landscape of oppression, a revolutionary idea was beginning to stir, a concept that would challenge the very foundations of belief. The catalyst for this profound shift was a singular, dramatic event, the Exodus, a mass departure from the land of Egypt, a desperate flight for freedom led by the prophet Moses. Whether precise historical record or powerful myth, its impact is undeniable. It speaks of a journey not just across physical wilderness, but through a spiritual one. It is a tale of divine intervention, of plagues and parting seas, a spectacle of celestial power wielded on behalf of the powerless. This dramatic escape became the central pillar of a new identity, a shared memory of deliverance that bound scattered people into a cohesive nation. Imagine the scene, a multitude, backs turned on the only world they knew, venturing into a barren and hostile expanse. The familiar cruelty of their masters was replaced by unknown terrors of the desert, thirst, starvation, and the constant threat of attack. Their survival depended not on many gods, but on faith in a single unseen entity. This was a radical departure from the established order. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a collective leap of faith into a future defined not by temples of stone, but by a covenant carried in their hearts, a promise of a new land and a new way of life. This journey through the wilderness was more than a migration. It was an incubation. It was here in the stark, silent emptiness that the nascent concept of monotheism was nurtured. Stripped of the elaborate rituals and iconic representations of Egyptian religion, the people were forced to connect with a deity that was abstract, transcendent, and intensely personal. The desert in its vastness mirrored the boundless nature of this one God. It was a landscape that demanded resilience, unity, and unwavering focus on a singular principle, setting the stage for a revelation that would forever alter the spiritual geography of our world. At the heart of this transformative journey stands a solitary, formidable peak, Mount Sinai. It is here, according to tradition, that the prophet Moses ascended into the clouds, into the very presence of the divine, to receive a set of laws that would become the moral bedrock for billions. This was not a negotiation between mortals and a capricious deity, but a direct transmission of a divine moral code. The Ten Commandments, etched onto stone tablets, represented a profound shift in human ethics. They were not merely suggestions for a better life. They were presented as absolute, universal principles, a direct contract between humanity and its creator. This moment represents the birth of a portable faith. Unlike the gods of Egypt or Babylon, who were tied to specific cities and temples, this one, God, was everywhere and nowhere. His law was not confined to a sacred precinct, but was inscribed on tablets that could be carried, a moral compass for a people on the move. This portability ensured the survival and spread of the belief system. It meant that a community's identity was no longer dependent on geography or political power, but on shared beliefs and ethical commitments. It was a religion designed for diaspora, for resilience, for a future that would see its followers scattered across the globe. From this single powerful flame of monotheism, three of the world's great religions would eventually ignite. Judaism, the first to carry this torch, built its entire culture and history around the covenant established in the desert. Centuries later, Christianity would emerge from within Judaism, reinterpreting the prophet's story and spreading the concept of one God across the Roman Empire and beyond. And later still, Islam would arise, honoring Moses as a prophet and affirming the core principle of absolute monotheism, which it carried to the far corners of the earth. These three spiritual giants, though distinct and often in conflict, all trace their lineage back to this moment. The influence of this event extends far beyond the walls of synagogues, churches, and mosques. The principles laid down in the desert have permeated the very fabric of Western and Middle Eastern civilization. Concepts of social justice, the rule of law, the intrinsic worth of the individual, and the moral responsibility to care for the poor and the stranger have their deepest roots in this narrative. The story of liberation from bondage has inspired countless movements for freedom and civil rights. Whether viewed as history or allegory, the story of the Exodus and the birth of monotheism remains one of the most powerful and enduring forces to have shaped our world. In the year 480 BCE, a shadow fell across the ancient world. From the east, the Persian Empire, the greatest superpower the world had ever seen, was on the march. Its king, Xerxes, commanded an army of almost unimaginable size, a vast multinational force drawn from every corner of his sprawling domain. Their goal was conquest, to subjugate the fractious, independent city-states of Greece and bring them under the singular rule of the Persian King of Kings. This was not merely a territorial dispute. It was a clash of civilizations, a confrontation between an absolute centralized monarchy and a collection of fiercely independent nascent democracies. As the Persian tide swept westward, overwhelming northern Greece, a palpable sense of dread settled over the Hellenic world. Many states submitted, seeing the futility of resistance against such a colossal force. The very future of Greece and the unique cultural experiments taking place within it hung precariously in the balance. The philosophies, the art, the early stirrings of democratic governance, all were threatened with being extinguished before they could truly flourish. It seemed inevitable that the entire peninsula would be absorbed into the Persian sphere, its culture diluted, its political freedoms erased, its destiny rewritten by a foreign master. But in the face of this existential threat, a desperate plan was forged. To halt the immense Persian land army, the Greeks needed to find a choke point, a place where their inferior numbers might stand a chance. They chose a narrow coastal pass known as Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Here the mountains plunged almost directly into the sea, creating a bottleneck so tight that the Persians' numerical superiority would be largely negated. It was a place where a few could hope to hold back many, a natural fortress where a stand could be made. The fate of Greece would be decided in this claustrophobic corridor of rock and sea. Leading this seemingly suicidal mission was a small elite force of 300 warriors from the city-state of Sparta, commanded by their king, Leonidas. The Spartans were a society utterly dedicated to the art of war, their lives a relentless cycle of training and discipline from birth. They were the finest soldiers in Greece, renowned for their courage, their skill, and their unwavering resolve to never retreat. They were not sent to Thermopylae to win, they were sent there to die, and in dying to buy precious time for the rest of Greece to rally its forces and prepare a unified defense. Theirs was a mission of sacrifice. For 3 days, this tiny contingent of Greeks, anchored by the 300 Spartans, held the pass. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their long spears and heavy bronze shields forming an unbreakable wall. The Persian army, accustomed to sweeping victories on open plains, crashed against this phalanx like a wave against a cliff. Xerxes, watching from a nearby hill, is said to have leapt from his throne in fury and disbelief as his elite troops, including his own personal guard, known as the Immortals, were repulsed time and again. The Greeks used the terrain to their advantage, their discipline and heavy armor, proving superior in the brutal close-quarters combat of the pass. The stand at Thermopylae was a masterclass in tactical defense, but it could not last forever. Ultimately, it was not overwhelming force, but betrayal that sealed their fate. A local resident, hoping for a reward, revealed a hidden mountain path that allowed the Persians to bypass the main Greek position and attack them from the rear. Surrounded with no hope of escape, Leonidas dismissed the bulk of the Greek allies, ordering them to retreat and warn the others. He and his 300 Spartans, along with a few hundred other loyal Greeks who refused to leave, remained to fight to the last man, fulfilling their purpose. Though the battle was a tactical defeat, the pass was taken, the Spartans were annihilated, and the way to Athens lay open. It was a strategic and moral victory of monumental proportions. The sheer audacity and courage of the stand sent a shockwave through Greece. It transformed a disparate collection of bickering city-states into a unified force with a common cause. The story of the men who chose to die for the freedom of their homeland became a powerful rallying cry, inspiring the Greek forces who would later achieve stunning victories at sea in the Battle of Salamis and on land at the Battle of Plataea, ultimately repelling the Persian invasion for good. The legacy of Thermopylae is therefore not one of defeat but of sacrifice and inspiration. It demonstrated that free men fighting for their homes and their liberty could stand against the might of a tyrannical empire. This narrative became a cornerstone of Western identity, a timeless story of defiance against overwhelming odds. Without this stand, it is entirely possible that Greek unity would have crumbled, that Athens would have been permanently destroyed, and that the democratic ideals and philosophical inquiries born there would have been lost to history. The West, as we know it, may well have been forged in the blood spilled at those hot gates. In the wake of the Persian Wars, one city-state rose to prominence above all others: Athens. It was here, in the years surrounding 508 BCE, that a political experiment of breathtaking audacity was undertaken. For millennia, humanity had been governed by kings, by pharaohs, by emperors, by small councils of aristocrats. Power was something inherited or seized by force. But an Athenian statesman named Cleisthenes introduced a series of reforms that turned this ancient model on its head. He proposed a system called democratia, from demos, the people, and kratos, power to the people. It was an idea as revolutionary as it was untested. This was not a simple transition. It was born from decades of social strife, of conflict between the wealthy aristocracy and the increasingly indebted and disenfranchised common citizenry. The reforms broke the power of the traditional clans, and redrew the political map of Athens, creating new tribes composed of citizens from different regions and social classes. The goal was to foster a new identity, one based not on lineage or wealth, but on a shared status as an Athenian citizen. The central institution of this new system was the assembly, where any adult male citizen could, in theory, speak, debate, and vote on the most important issues of the state, on laws, on war, on finances. Of course, this early democracy was deeply flawed and profoundly exclusive by our modern standards. Women were entirely excluded from the political process. Slaves, who made up a significant portion of the population, had no rights at all. And a large number of foreign residents, known as metics, were also denied citizenship. It was a democracy for a select group. Yet even with these severe limitations, the principle it established was earth-shattering. The idea that common men, farmers, potters, merchants, could stand in a public square and hold their leaders to account was a radical departure from any system of government that had come before it. The Athenian experiment placed an extraordinary amount of faith in the wisdom of the ordinary citizen. It required active participation. Juries were composed of hundreds of citizens, and many public officials were chosen by lottery on the belief that any citizen was capable of serving the state. This created a culture of public debate and civic engagement unlike any other in the ancient world. The city's public spaces, the agora and the naiks, became vibrant arenas of political discourse where the fate of the city was decided not by a single ruler, but by the collective will of its people. A new political creature had been born. The consequences of this political innovation were immense, and they rippled through every aspect of Athenian life. The freedom of speech and thought required for a functioning democracy created a fertile ground for an unprecedented cultural flourishing. It is no coincidence that the golden age of Athens, the era of the great playwrights Sophocles and Euripides, the historians Herodotus and Thucydides, and the philosophers Socrates and Plato occurred in the century following the establishment of democracy. The open intellectual climate, where ideas could be challenged and debated, spurred remarkable achievements in art, architecture, science, and philosophy. This new system of governance also fundamentally altered the nature of warfare and civic identity. The soldiers who fought for Athens were not subjects fighting for a king. They were citizens fighting for their own city, for their own rights, for a system in which they themselves had a direct stake. The sailors who powered the Athenian fleet to victory at the Battle of Salamis were the same men who voted in the assembly. This gave Athenian forces a motivation and a resilience that often baffled their autocratic rivals. The Parthenon, the ultimate symbol of Athens, was not just a temple to a goddess, it was a monument to the city itself, a celebration of the victory of its democratic citizens. However, the Athenian experiment was also volatile and fraught with danger. The same public assembly that could make wise decisions could also be swayed by a charismatic but reckless demagogue. They could vote for disastrous military campaigns like the ill-fated Sicilian expedition, or commit acts of great injustice, such as the trial and execution of their most famous philosopher, Socrates. The history of Athenian democracy is a lesson not only in its immense potential, but also in its inherent fragilities, demonstrating the constant tension between individual freedom and the stability of the state, a challenge that all democracies continue to face. Despite its eventual decline and conquest, the idea forged in Athens never truly died. It was studied and debated by the Romans, it was rediscovered by Renaissance thinkers, and it became a primary source of inspiration for the architects of modern republics during the Enlightenment, including the founding fathers of the United States. Every time a citizen casts a vote in an election, every time a person exercises their right to free speech to protest a government policy, every time we debate the direction of our society in the public square, we are participating in a tradition that began over 2,500 years ago on a sun-drenched hill in Athens. We are all, in some small way, the inheritors of their bold and revolutionary experiment. Here in the rugged highlands of Macedonia, a new power is stirring. It is a kingdom long considered peripheral, a backwater by the cultured city-states to the south. But from this harsh and unforgiving landscape, a leader of singular vision, Philip II, has forged a formidable military machine. He has unified the warring tribes, drilled his infantry into an unbreakable phalanx and now casts his gaze beyond his own borders. He has a son, a young man of extraordinary talent and burning ambition who watches, learns and waits. This is a world on the cusp of a seismic shift, one that will be driven not by a committee or a senate, but by the will of one remarkable individual. The stage is set in 336 BCE. The assassination of King Philip propels his son, barely 20 years of age, onto the throne. His name is Alexander. Many see him as a boy, an untested ruler whose grip on power is tenuous at best. Rivals circle, sensing weakness, and subject kingdoms begin to stir with rebellion. But they have profoundly misjudged their new king. He moves with a speed and ruthlessness that is simply breathtaking. He secures his borders, crushes his enemies at home, and demonstrates a tactical brilliance that belies his youth. The world is about to witness not the faltering of a dynasty, but the dawn of a new and terrifyingly efficient conqueror. His gaze, however, is not fixed on the familiar landscapes of Greece. He looks east towards the colossal, sprawling expanse of the Persian Empire. It is the superpower of its day, a behemoth stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, possessed of unimaginable wealth and near limitless manpower. To challenge it seems an act of sheer madness, a fool's errand. But for Alexander, it is not merely a challenge, it is destiny. He gathers his army, a force of veterans loyal to his father and now to him, and prepares to cross the Hellespont. This is more than an invasion. It is a crusade, an undertaking that will forever alter the map of the known world. The die is cast. With his small but highly disciplined force, he steps onto Asian soil, leaving the world he knows behind. He is driven by stories of the heroic age, by a desire to surpass the legends of Achilles and Heracles. His true legacy, however, will not be measured in the lands he conquers or the cities he raises, but in the connections he forges. He is a conduit for change, an agent of cultural fusion. The journey he is embarking upon will mix the philosophies of the West with the ancient wisdom of the East, creating a new hybrid world in his wake. The Hellenistic age is about to be born from the crucible of his conquests. The conquests unfold with astonishing speed at the Granicus River, then at Issus, and finally at Gaugamela. Alexander's tactical genius shatters the vast Persian armies. He is a master of the battlefield, anticipating his enemy's every move, using terrain and timing to his advantage, and leading his elite companion cavalry in devastating charges that break the enemy's will. The great king Darius III is forced to flee, his authority crumbling with each defeat. Great cities, from Sardis to Babylon, open their gates to the young conqueror. He is no longer just the king of Macedon, he is the master of Asia, the new ruler of the greatest empire on earth. But Alexander is more than a mere destroyer. He is a founder of cities, nearly 24 of them, all bearing his name. The most famous, Alexandria in Egypt, will become the intellectual and cultural capital of the ancient world, home to a great library and a lighthouse that is one of the wonders of the age. These new urban centers are not just military outposts, they are melting pots. Greek soldiers and administrators mix with Egyptian priests, Babylonian astronomers, and Persian nobles. A new common language, Koine Greek, becomes the lingua franca, allowing ideas to travel as freely as trade goods across the vast new empire. The push eastward continues relentlessly. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, a desire to reach the very ends of the world, Alexander leads his men through the treacherous mountain passes of the Hindu Kush and into the plains of India. Here he meets a different kind of resistance from fearsome war elephants and warrior kings like Porus. Though he is victorious once more, his own army, exhausted and homesick after a decade of ceaseless campaigning, finally refuses to go further. He has reached his limit not by force of arms, but by the will of his own men. The journey to the world's end is over. His return journey is fraught with hardship, and at the age of just 32, in the city of Babylon he had conquered, Alexander the Great dies. His empire, built on the strength of his singular personality, immediately splinters among his generals. Yet his true conquest was never merely territorial. He had broken down the barriers between East and West, creating a connected, Hellenized world that would endure for centuries. The knowledge, art, and philosophies he spread would profoundly influence every major power that followed, including the one now rising in the West, Rome. From the banks of the Tiber River, a new power emerges. It begins humbly as a small settlement, one of many in the Italian peninsula, its origins shrouded in myth and legend. This is Rome. It is a city defined by pragmatism, discipline, and an unyielding resilience. It grows not through sudden, brilliant conquest, but through a slow, methodical process of assimilation and expansion. It battles its neighbors, the Etruscans, the Samnites, the Greek cities to the south, and one by one it absorbs them. It perfects the art of turning defeated enemies into loyal allies, extending its citizenship and protection in exchange for manpower for its legions. The Roman genius is not for abstract philosophy, but for practical application. They are master engineers. They build roads, straight and true, that bind their growing territory together, allowing armies and traders to move with unprecedented speed. They construct monumental aqueducts that bring fresh water to their burgeoning cities, enabling populations to swell to sizes never before seen. Their legal system, codified in works like the 12 Tables, creates a framework for governance that is both complex and enduring. A system that will form the very bedrock of Western law for millennia to come. This is how an empire is built, stone by stone, law by law. The Republic is the heart of this new civilization. It is a system of checks and balances, of elected consuls and a powerful Senate, designed to prevent any one man from accumulating too much power. It is a system that fosters a deep sense of civic duty, of service to the state above all else. For nearly 500 years, this republic endures, weathering foreign invasions, internal strife, and the pressures of constant expansion. It conquers Carthage in the epic Punic Wars, it subjugates Greece, and its legions march from the shores of Spain to the deserts of Syria. The Mediterranean Sea becomes, for all intents and purposes, a Roman lake. But the very success of the Republic contains the seeds of its own destruction. The vast wealth pouring in from conquered provinces corrupts its politics, creating a vast gulf between the rich and the poor. Ambitious generals, commanding armies loyal to them rather than the state, begin to vie for ultimate power. The Republic descends into a century of brutal civil war, a conflict that will see figures like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar tear the state apart. From the ashes of this conflict, one man, Caesar's heir Octavian, will emerge triumphant. The Republic is dead. The Empire is born. Under its first emperor, now known as Augustus, Rome enters a period of unparalleled peace and prosperity. The Pax Romana. For 2 centuries, the empire is stable, its borders secure, its vast territories connected by a shared culture, language, and legal system. Trade flourishes, cities grow, and Roman civilization reaches its zenith. From the cold mists of Britain to the fertile banks of the Nile, one law and one authority holds sway. The eagle of the legions is the undisputed symbol of order and power across the known world. It seems as if this golden age, this monumental achievement of human organization, might last forever. But no empire is eternal. The immense strain of administering and defending such a vast territory begins to show. The borders are vast and porous, under constant pressure from so-called barbarian tribes in the north and the rival Sasanian Empire in the east. The cost of maintaining the massive army required to defend these frontiers becomes ruinous, leading to the debasement of currency and crippling inflation. Political instability returns, with emperors being made and unmade by their own legions in rapid, bloody succession. The empire becomes too large, too complex to be governed effectively from a single center. In a desperate attempt to manage the growing crisis, the Emperor Diocletian divides the empire into 2 halves, an eastern and a western, each with its own ruler. This administrative division soon becomes a permanent political and cultural fissure. The Eastern Empire, centered on the magnificent new capital of Constantinople, thrives. It is wealthier, more urbanized, and more defensible. The Western Empire, however, with its capital still in Italy, begins a slow, inexorable decline. It is plagued by internal decay, economic collapse, and a series of massive migrations of Germanic peoples across its borders, who are sometimes invaders, sometimes allies. The end, when it comes in 476 CE, is not a single cataclysmic event, but the culmination of a long, painful process. The last Western Roman emperor, a boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, is deposed not by a great conquering army, but by a Germanic chieftain in his own service. The central authority of Rome simply evaporates. Europe splinters into a mosaic of rival successor kingdoms. The great roads fall into disrepair, the aqueducts crumble, and the intricate web of trade and law unravels. A dark age descends upon the West. The light of Rome is extinguished, and for 1,000 years Europe will live among its magnificent ruins, waiting for a renaissance to reignite the flame. In the foothills of the Himalayas, in a small kingdom in what is now Nepal, a prince is born around the 5th century BCE. His name is Siddhartha Gautama. He is raised in a palace of unimaginable luxury, shielded from all the harsh realities of the world. His father, the king, ensures that he sees only beauty, pleasure, and health. He is surrounded by every comfort, destined for a life of power and indulgence. It is a gilded cage meticulously constructed to prevent him from ever questioning his place in the world or the nature of existence itself. But the human spirit, by its very nature, is curious. It cannot be contained forever. The carefully constructed illusion shatters during a series of journeys outside the palace walls. For the first time, Siddhartha confronts the raw, unavoidable truths of the human condition. He witnesses an old man, frail and bent with age. He sees a sick person racked with disease and pain. He observes a funeral procession and understands the stark finality of death. And finally, he encounters a wandering ascetic, a holy man who has renounced all worldly possessions, yet whose face radiates a profound sense of inner peace. These 4 sights awaken something deep within the prince. He realizes that his life of luxury is a fragile facade and that suffering is the universal fate of all living things. Haunted by these revelations, Siddhartha makes a momentous decision. He resolves to leave his palace, his wife, his newborn son, and his inheritance behind. He embarks on a quest not for power or wealth, but for an answer to the fundamental problem of suffering. He seeks a way to transcend the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that is a central tenet of the spiritual landscape of his time. This act, the Great Renunciation, is the first step on a long and arduous path. He trades his fine silks for a simple robe and sets out into the world with nothing but his determination. He studies with the great spiritual masters of his day, mastering their meditation techniques and philosophical systems. He practices extreme asceticism, subjecting his body to severe deprivation, believing that by punishing the flesh he could liberate the spirit. For 6 years he starves himself, holding his breath, enduring immense pain, pushing himself to the very brink of death. But he finds that this path too leads only to more suffering, not to liberation. True understanding, he concludes, must lie not in extreme indulgence or extreme denial, but in a balanced middle way. Abandoning the path of extreme self-mortification, Siddhartha sits beneath a Bodhi tree, vowing not to rise until he has found the answers he seeks. For 49 days he meditates, turning his awareness inward, examining the nature of his own mind, the origins of desire, and the mechanics of suffering. He confronts the temptations and fears projected by his own psyche, personified as the demon Mara. And finally, in a profound moment of clarity, he achieves enlightenment. He becomes the Buddha, the awakened one. He has seen the true nature of reality and has found the path to the cessation of suffering, the 4 noble truths, and the Eightfold Path. He could have chosen to remain in this state of blissful liberation, but he is moved by a deep and abiding compassion for all sentient beings still trapped in the cycle of suffering. He decides to teach. He travels to the deer park at Sarnath and delivers his first sermon, setting in motion the wheel of Dharma. He explains that suffering is caused by craving and attachment, and that by following a path of right understanding, right thought, right speech, and right action, anyone can achieve nirvana, the ultimate release. He gathers his first disciples, forming the Sangha, the community of monks and nuns, who will preserve and spread his teachings. The Buddha's message is revolutionary. It challenges the rigid caste system that dominates Indian society, teaching that one's worth is determined not by birth but by one's actions and state of mind. It offers a path to salvation that is direct and personal, based on self-discipline and mindfulness rather than elaborate rituals or priestly intermediaries. This radical egalitarianism has a powerful appeal, and his teachings, known as the Dharma, begin to spread. For 45 years, the Buddha walks across northern India, teaching people from all walks of life, from kings to courtesans, from merchants to beggars. Upon his death, his teachings do not fade away. They are codified by his followers and carried across the continent and beyond. Monks and missionaries travel the Great Silk Road, bringing Buddhism to Central Asia, China, Korea, and Japan. Others travel by sea to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. The philosophy takes root in these new lands, transforming their cultures, their art, their ethics, and their politics. It becomes one of the world's great spiritual traditions, a profound and enduring answer to life's oldest questions, born from one man's compassionate quest to understand and alleviate the suffering of the world. Here, on the vast and ancient subcontinent of India, a new power is stirring. It is the 3rd century before the Common Era, and the Mauryan Empire, a colossal entity of immense ambition, is expanding its territory like a relentless tide. At its helm is a formidable ruler, a man whose name will be etched into history, first in blood and then in stone. He is Ashoka, grandson of the great Chandragupta Maurya, and his gaze is fixed upon the one kingdom that dares to defy his dominion, Kalinga. This small but prosperous coastal state stands as the final obstacle to a unified empire, a defiant island in the path of an inexorable current of conquest, unaware of the storm it is about to unleash. The desire for total control is a powerful primal instinct in the world of empires, much like a predator's drive to secure its hunting grounds. For Ashoka, Kalinga was more than just land. It was a strategic jewel, a gateway to the sea routes of the Bay of Bengal and a symbol of ultimate authority. To leave it independent was to show weakness, an unacceptable flaw in the perfect tapestry of his rule. And so, the great imperial machine, the most powerful army on the subcontinent, was set in motion. Elephants like living tanks marched alongside legions of infantry and cavalry, a river of steel and determination flowing towards the unsuspecting kingdom, ready to crush all resistance in its path. The ensuing conflict, the Kalinga War, was not merely a battle, it was a cataclysm. The resistance from the Kalingans was fierce, a desperate struggle for their homes and their freedom. But the Mauryan war machine was overwhelming, a force of nature that could not be stopped. The fields, once green with rice paddies, were turned red with slaughter. The Daya River, it is said, ran crimson with the blood of the fallen. The scale of the carnage was almost unimaginable, a brutal testament to the destructive power of human ambition. Over 100,000 were slain, and many more were taken, their lives shattered and their freedom extinguished forever by the conqueror's decree. In the immediate aftermath of his victory, Ashoka surveyed the landscape of his achievement. He had won. Kalinga was his. But the sight that greeted him was not one of glorious triumph. It was a vista of profound and absolute devastation. The air hung thick with the stench of death, and the silence was broken only by the cries of the widowed and the orphaned. The cost of his ambition was laid bare before him, a kingdom of corpses, a legacy of sorrow. This was the moment of his greatest conquest, and yet it was also the moment where something deep within the emperor himself began to irrevocably break, a turning point born from unimaginable horror. It is in the crucible of profound trauma that the most remarkable transformations can occur. For Ashoka, the conqueror, the sight of Kalinga's destruction was a mirror reflecting the monstrous nature of his own actions. The king, who had sought absolute power over the land, now found himself powerless against the wave of remorse and revulsion that washed over him. He had achieved his goal, but the taste of victory was ash in his mouth. This was a pivotal moment, not just for one man, but for an entire empire. The fierce warrior king was about to embark on a journey inward, a quest to understand the suffering he had caused and to find a new path forward, away from the destructive cycle of violence. He found his answer not in the council of generals or the strategies of statecraft, but in the gentle teachings of a wandering monk. The philosophy of Buddhism, with its central tenets of non-violence, compassion and mindfulness, offered a radical alternative to the path of the sword. Ashoka began to see the world not as a territory to be conquered, but as a community of living beings deserving of peace and respect. He embraced this new creed not as a private faith, but as a guiding principle for his entire reign. The emperor who had brought so much death to the world would now dedicate his life to the preservation and sanctity of it, a truly revolutionary conversion. This transformation was not merely a change of heart, it became a change in policy. Ashoka the fierce was gone, replaced by Ashoka the righteous. He renounced aggressive warfare, declaring that the only true victory was the victory of Dharma, of moral and ethical conduct. He began erecting pillars and carving edicts into rock faces across his vast empire, not to boast of his military conquests, but to proclaim his new philosophy of peace, tolerance, and social welfare for all his subjects, regardless of their faith or origin. These stone messengers, scattered from modern-day Afghanistan to southern India, became the enduring symbols of his profound change, a public declaration of his remorse and his new purpose. The impact of Ashoka's conversion rippled far beyond the borders of the Mauryan Empire. He sponsored Buddhist missions, sending envoys to lands as distant as Greece, Egypt, and Sri Lanka, spreading the teachings that had so transformed his own life. In doing so, he helped elevate Buddhism from a local sect to a major world religion, proving that an empire could be a force not for destruction but for spiritual and cultural exchange. Ashoka demonstrated that true power lies not in the ability to take life, but in the will to nurture it, a timeless lesson that echoes through the corridors of history, a testament to the idea that even the most hardened heart can bend towards peace. For over 1,000 years it had stood as the sentinel of Christendom, the impregnable heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, a city of legendary wealth, of divine relics, and of walls that had repelled countless sieges. It was more than a city, it was an idea, the last living remnant of Roman glory, a bridge between the ancient world and the medieval age. By the mid-15th century, however, its empire had crumbled away, leaving the great city as a lonely island, a magnificent fossil surrounded by the rising power of the Ottoman Turks. Yet within its formidable ramparts, the embers of a great civilization still glowed, guarding a priceless inheritance of knowledge. The man who now stood before its gates was Sultan Mehmed II, a young, brilliant, and ferociously ambitious ruler. For him, Constantinople was the ultimate prize, the red apple of Ottoman desire. Capturing it was not just a strategic objective, it was a historical and religious destiny. To that end, he assembled an army of immense size, and more crucially, a weapon that would change the very nature of warfare forever. He commissioned the construction of colossal cannons, bronze behemoths capable of hurling massive stone balls over a mile, designed for one purpose: to shatter the unshakable walls of the city that had defied the world for a millennium. Inside, the defenders, led by the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, Palaiologos, prepared for the inevitable. They were hopelessly outnumbered, a small garrison of Byzantines and their Genoese allies against a vast Ottoman host. But they possessed a courage born of desperation and a deep-seated belief in the sanctity of their cause. For 53 days they held the line. The great chain across the Golden Horn blocked the Ottoman fleet, and the city's defenders worked tirelessly through the night, repairing the damage inflicted by the monstrous cannons during the day. It was a heroic, defiant last stand against the changing tide of history itself. The siege was a relentless, grinding affair, a clash of two worlds. The thunderous roar of Mehmed's great bombards became the daily rhythm of the city's final days, each impact shaking the very foundations of the ancient capital. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the shouts of men, the splintering of stone, and the constant prayers of a populace facing annihilation. Despite their bravery, the defenders were being worn down. The once mighty Theodosian walls, the greatest defensive fortifications ever built, were beginning to crumble under the unprecedented assault. The fate of the city and the 1,000-year-old empire it represented hung by the slenderest of threads. The final assault came on the 29th of May, 1453. Under the cover of darkness, Ottoman forces launched a multi-pronged attack, overwhelming the exhausted defenders. A small gate, left unbolted by chance or by treachery, allowed a contingent of attackers to breach the inner walls. Panic spread like wildfire. The last emperor, Constantine XI, casting aside his imperial regalia, charged into the fray and was lost in the chaotic swirl of battle, dying alongside his soldiers. With his fall, the spirit of the defense was broken. The city, the second Rome, the bastion of 1,000 years, had finally fallen. A new era had begun, violently and irrevocably. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across the Christian world. It was a profound psychological blow, the end of an epoch. The primary trade routes to the east, long controlled by the Byzantines, were now firmly in Ottoman hands, compelling European powers to seek new paths to the riches of Asia. This economic necessity would fuel a great age of exploration, pushing mariners like Columbus and da Gama out onto uncharted oceans. The search for a new way to the east would inadvertently lead to the discovery of a new world to the west, fundamentally redrawing the map of the planet and shifting the global balance of power forever. But the city's most precious treasures were not its gold or its relics. They were its people and its knowledge. In the years leading up to and immediately following the siege, a wave of Byzantine scholars, artists, and intellectuals fled the doomed city. They packed what they could, not jewels, but manuscripts, the priceless works of Plato, of Aristotle, of Galen, and of Ptolemy. These were the foundational texts of classical antiquity, much of which had been lost or forgotten in Western Europe. During the long, dark centuries that followed the collapse of Rome, they carried with them the intellectual DNA of the ancient world. These refugees found a welcoming home in the burgeoning city-states of Italy, particularly Florence. Here, their arrival acted as a powerful catalyst. The reintroduction of these ancient Greek texts and the direct knowledge of classical thought ignited a fervent interest in the art, science, and philosophy of the past. This sudden, explosive rediscovery of lost wisdom was the spark that lit the fire of the Renaissance. Thus, in a remarkable twist of fate, the death of one great empire, the fall of its final bastion, directly led to the cultural and intellectual rebirth of an entire continent. One world ended, so that another could be reborn. So, why does any of this matter today? Why should the struggles of long-dead emperors, the scribblings on ancient clay, or the fall of a distant city concern us now? Because history is not a static collection of stories confined to the past. It is a living, breathing force, a deep and powerful current that flows directly into our present moment. The device in your hand, the very language you speak, your fundamental rights to vote, to believe, to voice your opinion. All of these can trace their complex lineage back to these ancient fractures in time, these pivotal moments that sent ripples across the millennia. Every law that governs our societies carries the faint echo of Hammurabi's stone. Every debate on faith and morality is shaped by the revolutionary idea of a single universal God that emerged from the deserts of the Near East. The very concept of democracy, the power of the people, is a fragile flame first lit in the agora of Athens and defended in the narrow pass of Thermopylae. Our interconnected global culture, a vast network of trade and ideas, owes its existence to the roads built by Rome and the Hellenistic world forged by Alexander's ambition. These events are not relics, they are the architectural blueprints of our modern world. Our journey through these 10 moments reveals a profound truth. The world we inhabit was not inevitable. It was built piece by piece, decision by decision, often through conflict, sacrifice, and extraordinary transformation. The embrace of peace by an Indian emperor helped shape the ethics of half the world. The fall of one great city wall in the east unlocked a torrent of knowledge that would lead to the rebirth of the west. The past is a complex tapestry, and every thread, no matter how ancient, is woven into the fabric of our daily lives, influencing our thoughts, our technologies, and our very identity in ways we seldom perceive. And so we see that the past is never truly past. It is the foundation upon which our future is being constructed right now, in this very second. And we've only just begun to scratch the surface of its immense and intricate story. There are countless other moments, other forgotten heroes and pivotal events, waiting in the shadows of time to be rediscovered. For to understand where we are going, we must first understand where we have been. The story of humanity is the greatest story of all, and its next chapter is still waiting to be written by the echoes of its first.